Story 1. I attended a high school called Rampart that, despite being a blue ribbon school, had serious budget issues. The budget problems got so bad that the principal started renting out the school gym to anyone willing to pay up to use it. Some guy rented the gym out for a Saturday night, saying he was going to hold a church dance. Instead, he held a rave that got so out of hand it destroyed the gym. The incident quickly grew into legend amongst the students. Many claim to have been there or to have known the guy who threw the rave. We weren't able to use the gym for the rest of the year. They kept the doors locked, but there were constant attempts to force them open so we could see the damage. It did not take long for the students to start referring to the school as Rave Part, and whenever we had to sing the national anthem, would finish it, and the home of the rave. The next year we had a new principal too, but we never knew if the old principal was fired because of the rave incident. Story 2. This happened at my school in the UK around 2002. We had an indoor swimming pool at my school that was always really cold, and one particularly freezing December day, a bunch of us decided that we really didn't fancy having to do swimming for PE. So we dared this kid called Todd, who was pretty crazy, to crap in the pool. He said he would do it for 10 pounds. We had a quick whip round and managed to get the money pretty quick between us. To avoid getting caught, he decided to crap into the pool from the roof, through a skylight. A lot of the buildings in our school had staircases on the outside, so it didn't take much effort for a couple of us to give him a leg up onto the roof. Once he was up there, we ran back down to the pool and looked through the windows. Sure enough, after a couple of minutes, we saw 2 or 3 of Todd's ass apples drop into the perfectly still pool, causing a gentle, disgusting, but oddly beautiful ripple. There was no PE for us that day. Story 3. At the school where I used to teach, the students told me that years ago, someone swapped the science teacher's Bill Nye videotape with a hardcore adult videotape. According to legend, the teacher didn't notice for quite a while, and the students watched several minutes of smut that day. I told my class that it was just a stupid rumor, and I'm sure that never happened. When class was over, one of my students walked up and said, "Mr. X, it's true. My brother was the one who switched the tape." Story 4. My junior year, the seniors put hay everywhere inside the English building, where it basically looked like a farm. One of the admins wasn't even letting people look at the mess inside. Also, when I was in second grade, my school was supposed to have a fire drill, so for some reason, the alarm wasn't going off. The lunch ladies decided it would be a good idea to get something in the kitchen on fire to make the alarm go off. They burnt a good majority of the lunch that was supposed to be served that day. Story 5. When I was in grade 9, I was sitting in the computer lab working during the communications class. All of the sudden, we hear this loud revving getting louder and louder, something passing by very quickly, then fading away. Our teacher ran out of the room after it, and crikey, I had no idea the man could move that quickly. I was in crutches due to a sports injury, so I had to hobble out behind the rest of the class as we tried to find out what was going on. Apparently, one of the seniors brought an ATV to school and drove through the halls. What was legendary was that he somehow was never caught. This was in Canada in the early 2000s. There was a video floating somewhere on Facebook, which means it's probably lost forever. Pretty crappy, since it was literally one of the early digital cameras taped onto the guy's helmet. If I remember correctly, they let him in through an unused auto classroom side door, and he rode out the back. The area was very rural, so he probably drove it in instead of in the back of a pickup. Most likely rode it straight home too, so yeah, no proof at the end of it. Story 6. A guy from my high school thought it would be a great idea to streak through the halls on the last day of school. After running around buck-ass naked, people who witnessed it began whispering about some guy streaking. Pretty soon, the entire school was talking about this unknown mystery guy who ran around with his dick out. Biology teacher witnessed it and said, "Maybe it's just chilly today, but he isn't very well endowed." Soon after, he went to the front office and turned himself in. He apparently walked into a room full of administrators, all women, and just said, "It was me." They all busted out laughing and said, "Just don't do it again, okay?" Story 7. Jeff jumped off the roof of the chapel into a dumpster filled with empty cardboard boxes. 50-foot drop, 8x8 dumpster. Twice a week at our school, the junior and senior guys were on garbage/recycling duty after lunch. We'd gather all the garbage bags and recycling from the classrooms and offices. The building was a school attached to a church with offices and a sort of community center. It wasn't a huge building, but it was pretty big. We would take all the garbage and trash out to the dumpster, which was set next to some sheds behind the building. That's how it all started. Jeff jumping off a 10 to 12-foot shed into a dumpster full of cardboard boxes. We'd laugh, roll the dumpster out to where the garbage guy could get to it, and someone else rolled it back when the garbage was collected. One day, Jeff climbed the backstop of the baseball field right near the dumpsters. That was a 25 to 30-foot drop, I think. He made that one look easy. Then he dropped in from out of a tree that was probably about 40 feet up. Finally, about a month from our graduation, he told us his plan. He had to break into the crawl space above the chapel, accessible by a padlocked trapdoor on the third floor of classrooms, then climb up through the attic space of the chapel and onto the roof. The chapel parking lot sloped sharply by about 7 to 8 feet, which is where the 50-foot drop comes in. We saved boxes for weeks, set them up in the dumpster, put it in the parking lot about 15 feet from the chapel wall, and watched him jump. Story 8. Our school has a huge statue of a Mustang at the front because our mascot is a Mustang. It's about 40 feet up from the entryway, so everyone sees it when they come in. One morning, there was a bright pink on it because Mustangs are male, and our huge statue was neutered. It took them a while to get it off there because they didn't want to ruin the statue or leave any piece of the evidence behind. And it was too heavy to remove from its place, so there it stayed, with a banner hung across the entryway, blocking the statue. Nobody knows who did it except for the masterminds of the crime. The school was in southwest Pennsylvania. Story 9. Apparently, some of the guys a few years ahead of me got into the principal's car, took off the brake, and pushed it up a makeshift ramp to the roof of the shed. I don't know how he got it down. The guys in my year managed to swap the vice principal's smoking pipe. They put up ransom posters everywhere. In another class, they managed to get into the ceiling tiles and plug socket. So they took an old phone with a dirty ringtone and a charger and left it up there. For whatever reason, because of the acoustics, the sound seemed to shift around the room as you walked. The number got passed around, so people could call whenever they needed to disrupt the class for a while. Story 10. Kid gets yelled at, runs out of school into the woods. Helicopters come and search for hours for the kid. School goes on lockdown. SWAT team finds him a mile away eating Snickers in the woods. Comes back next week like nothing happened. I saw the whole thing out the window. Very crazy. Happened last month. Story 11. 2 years ago, the app Yik Yak was growing in popularity at my school. Maybe about 25% of the student population had it. But since it's anonymous, people started roasting other people through it. Just as people were no longer using Yik Yak, our head principal heard about people roasting other people. He made an announcement, talking about Yik Yak and digital citizenship. Naturally, everyone re-downloaded the app. And anybody who didn't previously have it downloaded it as well. Word quickly got around that some teachers got Yik Yak as well, and were monitoring it. People started to post stuff, like fight in the art hallway, and laugh as a group of 3 teachers would speed walk by, then towards the art hallway, only to find out there was no fight and see the next post, fight in the cafeteria. This went on for 45 minutes until people moved on to better pranks. I'm pulling the fire alarm next period. Our head principal misread this as firearm and called a lockdown on the school, which lasted for 80 minutes. And cops were brought in to secure the school. Later that night, my school was on the news, and Yik Yak is now blocked within 100 miles, I think, of any school in my school board. Story 12. In high school, we weren't allowed to wear costumes for Halloween. My senior year, a giant group of us, about a good half or 3/4 of the class, decided that we were going to dress up anyway and meet in the parking lot before school to march in together. I spent the night before making my costume, which was a suit of armor made out of cardboard with metallic tape, a sword made the same way, and one of those broomstick horses. The next day, we all gathered like we had said and marched in together. It was hilarious. But I guess they found out, so the deans and assistant deans were waiting for us in the cafeteria to take our IDs so we could report to detention. One of my friends had dressed up as an ATM that he made out of cardboard. When they asked him for his ID, he was ready and slipped it out of a slot like a debit card. The best part was at the end of the day, when we all gathered for detention. They didn't have enough room for us and all the other people that were there for other reasons. Out of frustration, they decided to make our detention Saturday ones and spread them out. It was totally worth it though. Story 13. I'm from a small town in Indiana. That means two things. Nobody really knows what you're talking about when you say where you're from. Here in Indiana, you're either from around Fort Wayne or around Indianapolis. You never see fights break out. Maybe a little slapfest, but that's it. The worst I'd witnessed before this was this one girl dumping Gatorade on another girl. Nothing exciting. But this day broke both stereotypes. We were put on a hard lockdown that day, meaning we had to sit in class until the teacher released us. We missed the entirety of third period, sitting there in second period while our teachers got bored and started watching cat videos with us on YouTube. Typically, a hard lockdown means a shooter got into the school or something, but nope, that apparently was not going on. A senior, who was over 18, got into a fight with a freshman over a sophomore girl, and then they pushed each other out a window. We were on the news. You don't say you're from around Fort Wayne anymore. Nowadays in Indiana, you can get away with saying, "We're from that town where the kids went out the window." Yes, some people also say, "I'm from around Chicago," or "I'm from Direction, Indiana." My point was, you'll never hear a guy tell you they're from Wabash, Indiana. Second, I seem to have miscalculated the impact of the window shatter. It was on the Fort Wayne news station, so only people in Northeast Indiana knew about it. I'm not going to confirm the location, so please don't try to send me your guesses. Finally, we don't really say we're from the place where the kid went out the window. Usually, if you do happen to say the name of your town or high school, people will respond with, "Isn't that where those kids went through a window?" Story 14. My friend used to piss in the library book return slot as protest for being sent to Saturday detention. He'd never been caught because the school was empty and cameras were off on Saturday. One day, a stray teacher happened to be in the right place in the right time and walked past him doing it. The teacher screamed, and he panicked and pulled away quickly. The flap for the return slot was a single hinge and folded inward and down. So when he pulled, it closed in on his dick and pinched it shut. For the next 3 hours, he was stuck with his dick in the wall in excruciating pain while several people who were called in tried to pry it loose. Police showed up and broke the flap, and he was sent to a correctional school on Monday for a month. Some people just fly too close to the sun. God bless. Story 15. We used to have school sports on a Tuesday or Wednesday afternoon, and all of them required people to change into their sport uniform. All except one, 10-pin bowling. Because of this, 10-pin bowling was very popular among people who couldn't be bothered getting changed. One day when I was in year 8, a guy in my year bet another kid $10 that he wouldn't take a shit on the bathroom floor of the bowling alley. So naturally, the kid, who is pretty stupid, agrees with the bet and promptly shits on the bathroom floor. Pretty soon after that, it becomes obvious who took a shit on the floor, and both the guy who offered the money and the guy who took the shit both got into a lot of trouble. The saddest part about this story is that he never even got the $10. Story 16. Right around the time when the emo style was really becoming a thing, especially in the younger grades, I believe the grade 8s were the most emo, a few kids in my grade, 11, posted up a bunch of signs around the school that said, "Kill yourself, emo kid," and other things like that. I do believe they were caught and given detention, but the best part of the whole thing was when they called out over the intercom that any student who identifies as emo, please come to the cafeteria. And they apparently had this giant hugfest over the whole thing. It was hysterical. And the kids responsible for posting the posters, which included our valedictorian by the way, became mildly famous for it, until all the hype died down. Story 17. In my school, I get off the bus, get in a long line to get through doors, which go to metal detectors, then it goes into the lunchroom. All rooms branch off from there. Well, one day they shut the doors. No one knew why, but many people trampled over each other to look through the windows, which were large. I didn't feel like dying at the moment, so I stayed in the back, on my computer, playing Smash Bros. We go to a tech school. Everyone has computers. People up at the windows were screaming at the top of their lungs, cheering something on. They reopened the doors and let us in 30 minutes later, finished the metal detector scan, and told us we were in lockdown. Lockdown lasted 3 hours, which was fine. No class, played computer games. We then went to our classes. What happened was the day before, a gang shooting occurred outside of the school, but that was somehow the cause of the fight at our school. A large fight. 10 people per group, 5-ish groups, knives, and one gun somewhere. The legendary part was many principals and cops were involved in breaking it up. Many people got body slammed to the ground. But Dr. Black, one of the principals, randomly got hit by a muffin out of nowhere. This was the butt of jokes at the school for a long time. Story 18. At our school, on the Year 11's final day of the year, they would do Egg and Flour Day. Essentially, pelting the lower years with eggs and flour. This was a long-standing tradition at my school, and went back decades. As you can imagine, with parents understandably annoyed at the sight of the kids coming home covered in mess, the school received a lot of complaints. Because of this, the school clamped down on it in the past 2 to 3 years, with huge punishments for those caught taking part. To get around this, the Year 11s typically move the location to somewhere off grounds where students could be ambushed on the way home. Typically local shops. Anyway, it was our turn. We were the Year 11s now. We wanted to make our mark. A group of us, around 10 or so, got together towards the end of the year and started brainstorming. It took us about a week to come up with it, and it was perfect. Or so we thought. Here was the plan. The school was recently going through some renovations, so a few things were moved around, and a few areas were off limits, including one of the fields. Now, this field was where we would go in the event of a fire drill. Because of this, the fire drill point was moved to the tennis courts. Great! Why was this great? Because the tennis courts bordered on the local woods. The very edge of these woods were bordered by incredibly dense growth that was very difficult to see anything through. Between the growth and the tennis courts was a 10-foot fence, and just behind the growth was a pathway. Perfect. So the plan was set. We will send a guy inside, get him to pull the fire alarm, then send a barrage of eggy flour death to the unsuspecting lower year peasants beyond the fence. Skip forward to the day of the event. We sent Tim in to be the man on the inside. We were ready and waiting in the woods, armed to the teeth with pancake ingredients. We waited a long time. It must have been an hour and a half at that point. We'll come back to this later. This was before mobile phones, so we had no contact with the man on the inside. An oversight. We sent in Christian to find out what was going on, and we waited. Not long this time. 20 minutes later, the bell went off. It was happening. First, we only hear the piercing ring of the bell. A minute later, the loud chatter of many prepubescent voices. It got louder and louder. The tennis court was filling up. Students were getting into their lines. We waited for the perfect moment to strike. A few more minutes later, things quieted down. We started to hear the teachers shooting out names, going through their registers. This was it. Time to strike. With the students now silent, it was time to unsilent them. Without saying a word, we unleashed. Cartons of eggs were emptied into the air, over the fence, and down onto the underlings to the most satisfying crack splats. Flour baggies were split and tossed over, leaving trails of white smoke before landing with a puff and filling up the area with clouds of potential biscuit. The screams. Oh, they were glorious. The complete sound of chaos. It started with silence, shock as to what was going on. Then the fear set in. Nobody wanted to be egged. The tennis courts exploded into a mass of running kids, dodging yoke, trying to get out of the way. Teachers trying to find out what was going on, barking orders and trying to calm everyone down, to little success. And that was it. Within 60 seconds, we had exhausted our ammo, and it was time to retreat. Laughing hysterically and celebrating our accomplishment, we ran back into the woods and fell back to our meeting point. It was done. We were legends. Now, let's fast forward a week. Remember Tim, the guy on the inside who took too long to pull the alarm? Turns out, he didn't pull the alarm because he noticed they were all covered by CCTV. Another oversight. When Christian went in, he didn't bother looking and pulled the first alarm he came across. He was called into school a few days later and ordered to give a list of names. It was either he did or prom would be canceled that year. Can't blame him, really. I probably would have done the same thing. Those who were on the list, the choice was either 8 hours of community service in the school or we were barred from prom. We all took the service and spent the day with the school caretaker doing absolutely all. It was great. 10 out of 10. Would egg again. Story 1. They found out the password for the high school's website and edited all sorts of things. Whether it was exposing certain faculty for being scummy or creepy by rewriting their bios, or changing the campus security and safety tab to snitches get stitches. It made quite the buzz for years to come, and as far as I know, they never got caught. Story 2. My friend once was pissed off at the rest of us guys. 5 of us. He chased us into the bathroom because he wanted to be a tough guy and thought one of us was hiding in a stall. He says, "Peekaboo, I see you," and kicks the stall door in on a teacher we all knew taking a crap. The teacher said, "I see you too, Nathan. Now close the door." I will die the day I forget about that. The teacher's response was legendary. Agreed. Honestly, at that point, what else are you going to do? Invite them in for a cup of tea? Challenge them for the seat? Model the proper way to greet another on the toilet? Teaching is great. Story 3. Maybe not legendary, but an interesting and funny experiment. There were 3 high schools in my hometown. 2 of them, both named after famous historical figures of said town, were in a sort of rivalry with each other. Nothing serious, but the students would casually trash talk the other school a lot, mostly in good fun. Each school had a display case with a bust of their respective historical namesakes somewhere in the building. They were just some decoration, objects that you would pass by every single day and pay little attention to. So we figured we'd test how little attention people actually paid these things. So one night, a few buddies of mine and I got together. Most of us were from my school, but we had a few inside men from the other one as well. We split up into 2 teams, got access to both buildings simultaneously, picked open the very cheap locks on the display cases, grabbed the busts, and switched them. Keep in mind, these schools were not that close to one another, and none of us had been old enough to drive at that point. So we had to carry these limestone busts through half the town. We then locked the busts into the display cases again and left. We had managed completely non-destructive entry to both schools, so nobody ever found out. It took almost an entire year for anyone to even notice. To this day, no teacher has ever found out who was responsible. But no damage was done, so they didn't try hard enough to figure it out. Story 4. This kid in my class put the school for sale on Craigslist. He provided the school's attendance office number as a point of contact because everyone hated the receptionist there. They were getting calls from interested buyers for days who wanted to buy multiple acres of property with a big swimming pool and a track. Story 5. This kid once brought a backpack full, and I mean completely full, of marbles to school. He went to the main staircase near the front, up the 3rd floor, and dumped the whole bag over the stairwell. How those marbles didn't break the glass trophy case at the bottom is beyond me, but marbles went everywhere. Surprisingly, he never got caught. He either managed to run to one of the stairwells at the end of the hall and get to the bottom before teachers had time to react, or he hid somewhere until the first bell rang. Story 6. One of my friends brought in a universal remote and tuned in to the TV in the lunch hall. This TV's original remote had long since been lost, so he had the only one. Instead of the news during lunch, he would change it to sitcoms. The teachers were pretty clueless and kept flicking through dozens of channels only for him to immediately change back. They even started turning it off. He just turned it back on again. About a month of this, and the teachers finally gave up. Nobody except our immediate friend group knew it was him doing this. But the entire school had whispers about this mystery man for ending the scourge that was the news channel. Story 7. A kid hit the fire alarm when the mayor was visiting our school. For context, we had an assembly the week before where we were specifically told not to hit the fire alarm during the mayor's visit unless there was an actual fire, as it was a common occurrence at our school to just hit the fire alarm whenever. Story 8. Teacher tries to open the door, but it does not move. Teacher says he'll ask the maintenance dudes to help open it. While he's away, the dude tries to force the door open. Instead, falls through the door as he just creates a hole. Doing so, however, opens the door. Teacher comes back without a maintenance guy. Teacher blinks for a moment, then says, "Thanks for opening the door. I'll need to know who to thank." No one answers. But only one dude has pieces of wood in his hair, so he got caught. Mess with the bull and you'll get the horns. I honestly thought that's where it was going. Story 9. It was legendarily stupid. We had mandatory swimming classes in my sophomore year of high school. Anyways, 3 days a week, the school was getting bomb threats, and all of us would have to leave class to go to the gym. The threats always happened at the same time. This went on for weeks and weeks. It turns out there was this kid who didn't want to swim and who was using a payphone down the block to call in the threats. This was 1985. He got suspended for 2 weeks and had to go take gym for summer school. He is a legend to this day, yet I can't remember his name. Story 10. A few years after I graduated, the school was preparing to take their assessment tests, which rate the schools. Many people think these tests are a waste of time, but they are important to school administrators. So the principal orders that some classes be interrupted, in order to make sure that all the kids have refreshers in some basic math and writing skills. A few kids in a U.S. History honors class were angry. They resented the interruption, as the classes were preparing them for an independent AP exam that awarded college credit. In response, they decided to intentionally sabotage the assessment tests. Our school was in an upper middle class area and regularly scored in the low 90s, the top 10%. Then, suddenly, the school suddenly scored in the mid to low 80s. Turns out that 15 to 20 students out of 300 turning in absolute zeros can impact an average score. School administrators went berserk. Stories were circulated. Students were threatened, but nothing came of it. The students never confessed. The tests were anonymous. The school rules didn't forbid poor performance. It also helped that the students were led by kids whose parents were well trained in protesting during the 1960s. Was a great scene. Story 11. In high school, 2 seniors who had been buds since forever got into a fight in the hallway in between class periods. What makes it legendary is that they first met in Taekwondo class, when they were in kindergarten. Movies just show the performative aspect of martial arts. This was just... they were doing flying kicks at each other. It was so brutal. The teachers didn't dare to break them up. They only stopped because they got tired from beating each other senseless. Story 12. It was my senior prom, and my class's valedictorian, a dude named Tyler, had vanished for a prolonged period of time. Just as people were noticing and asking if anyone had seen him, he reappears in a skin-tight Spider-Man costume on stage with the band and starts breakdancing and pelvic thrusting on stage. 2 years later, he began fighting crime, this time in a different costume. Story 13. I don't think the person who did it was ever caught, but during my junior year of high school, someone snuck in chickens. So there were a couple dozen chickens just roaming the halls, and all the teachers were panicking. For some reason, the faculty treated them like rabid dogs. There is nothing funnier than seeing literal roadblocks set up around a chicken and 4 teachers all red-faced and pulling their own hair. Story 14. I've shared this story before, but it's probably one of my favorite memories of high school. Halloween costumes were banned at my high school because of some idiots like 10 years before that dressed up and used it as an excuse to hide their face while they vandalized the school. My senior year, more than half of the class decided that we would still dress up and march into the school together in the morning. We all knew we would be punished right away, but it didn't matter. I stayed up all night making a suit of armor out of metallic duct tape and cardboard, along with a broomstick horse to ride. The next day, we all gathered in the parking lot and waited for everyone to show up. People went all out, and there were a lot of amazing costumes. And after about 20 minutes of waiting, we started our march in. The deans had learned of our plan and were waiting for us as we entered. They started pulling people aside in groups and taking student IDs to hand out detentions. In my group, there was one guy dressed up as an ATM, and when the dean asked for his ID, he started making ATM noises and then slipped the ID out through the slot where you would put your debit card in. It was one of the funniest things, and I was so jealous that my costume was not as clever as his. Even though having so many of us participate was pretty awesome, His costume just made that whole event for me. Story 15. For a senior prank, a group of kids dressed up in all black with masks. They ran down the main hall of the school with industrial buckets of cheap vegetable oil, pouring it everywhere. I mean everywhere. Right before the bell rang for the passing period, kids were slipping and falling all over the place, spreading the oil even further throughout the school. It was so bad, they ended up sending everyone home so they could clean up the mess. The school conducted an investigation, pulling camera footage from campus and interviewing students. Of course, the kids were bragging to friends about their accomplishment, so the suspects were pulled into the office. They didn't even need to interrogate them. They knew they all did it. How? They were all wearing the exact same shoes when they pulled it off. They were suspended for 5 days. The school was surprisingly pretty cool with the whole thing. Story 16. A special needs kid got a 2-day in-school suspension because he threw a sharpened pencil into the drop ceiling tile. He saw a friend of mine do it and thought it was the coolest thing ever. A kid on the football team heard about what had happened and protested the suspension directly to the assistant principal. The assistant principal stuck firm to his decision and threatened, "And if anyone else gets caught, it will be out of school suspensions." The following Monday, the entire second floor was closed down for the morning. Come to find out, the kid and the football team got into the school over the weekend and just blanketed the entire second floor ceiling with sharpened pencils. The video of it was stellar. Story 17. A little foggy on the details, but a few stink bombs went off at the same time in 3 separate parts of the building. But no one was ever caught or punished for it. Then they searched everyone before graduation that year to make sure it didn't happen again. I wonder, though, if it was something more like liquid ass or in a can, because the school was convinced it was stink bombs, but they never found evidence of them. Story 18. Not one student, but all seniors. It was customary at our school that on a hot day near the end of the year, seniors would start a water balloon fight. It was usually quite small, and the teachers were used to it, so they could put a stop to it quickly. Not this time, though. We had been dropping hints here and there for several days and weeks beforehand, talking about it in hallways, within earshot of teachers, leaving behind empty balloons, etc. The day before the actual attack, after school hours, we brought thousands of balloons to the school, and a good 10 to 20 people started filling them at water fountains and in the toilets. We kept them in big buckets, filled with water so the balloons wouldn't burst, and hid them in the bushes around the school. The day of the attack, we had some mock maneuvers. Groups of people would suddenly start running towards the school entrance, the toilets, the principal office. Teachers would be running to stop us, only for nothing to happen. Then came the actual attack. Everyone suddenly ran into the bushes, grabbed the buckets, and started unleashing hell on the other kids. The teachers closed in, trying to destroy our balloons, but there were just so many. They couldn't get rid of them. Everyone was soaking wet after. The most legendary thing wasn't the number of balloons or the planning of the attack. It was the fact that each and every senior participated in that. Buying balloons, bringing buckets, filling balloons, etc. Everyone did something. Despite all the high school drama, we managed to all come together for this epic prank. Story 19. School just decided to give everyone iPads after a few years of letting physics class use them as their textbooks. At lunch, everyone turned on AirDrop to share memes, which they weren't supposed to do. However, the teachers let it slide, figuring it wasn't worth punishing since everyone does it and nothing super inappropriate has been found yet. One kid in my younger sibling's class aired a meme about being the principal that wasn't inappropriate and used a photo of him when he was a math teacher earlier in his career. He found it on some archived page on the internet. From what I recall, the text used was more looking for laughs about how he used to teach math and now he's the principal. Basically, just some dumb thing that staff would have laughed off after telling him not to use school staff in airdropped memes. The kid who did this had never acted out in school. The worst he probably did was forget an assignment or two. He was detained for a whole week. The principal has a complex. No other student has gotten in as much trouble for airdropping things at the school. Story 20. One day in 7th grade, the class clown was verbally saddened by the fact that our female math teacher didn't wear a dress again like he had asked. He promised her that tomorrow he will wear a dress as well so that she wouldn't be the only one wearing a dress. The next day comes around, and she isn't in a dress. Clown comes in not wearing one either, and is shocked that she didn't wear one. She responded with, "Neither did you." Then this freaking legend started to reveal that under his normal clothes, he was indeed wearing his sister's dress. We all died laughing, and he dead wore it the rest of class. It was too uncomfortable for him though, so he changed back for the rest of the day. Legend. Story 21. In middle school, there was a kid in my grade that absolutely hated being at school, so he was always trying to find ways to make everyone else as miserable as him. My math teacher at the time was quite a pacifist and eventually resulted in ignoring his behavior. The student did not like that at all. So one day he brought in an electric razor and snuck up on her before class had started and everyone was walking in. All of a sudden, everyone heard a shriek, and we looked to see the student with the razor in hand and hair on the ground. He basically gave her a reverse mohawk. Lucky for her, the rest of her hair seemed to cover it to a degree. That was the last day we saw that student. He got what he wanted, though. However, I believe we heard that she pressed charges on him. Story 22. I had a buddy that was known for knocking out more than one father-son combo during after-school fights. One where the parents ran up to break it up. He turned around and clocked the dad. Another when he was fighting near Main Street bus stop and the father happened to see the fight while driving by. Unfortunately, when the dad hopped out to stop it, the legend turned around and KO'd the dad right on Main Street. Wild. Story 23. A few people decided to do a senior prank. I was not involved with that prank, but I did another. They broke into the bus yard with old electric impacts and removed the nuts holding all of the benches to the studs in the floor. They glued the door shut with silicone. Then, they deflated all of the school bus tires. The next morning, all of the bus drivers showed up to flat tires, not punctured, just released through the valve. While someone was inflating the tires, someone else was cutting through the silicone. When they got all of the tires pumped back up, they went to leave, and shortly into their drive, all of the benches went flying every which way. There was no school that day. Story 24. Legendary, but in a bad way. There were a lot of gang fights breaking out for several months for no reason at all. Like, there was peace between the gangs, then suddenly, everyone was at each other's throats. The last fight that finally brought an end to it was when a teacher was pinning one of the kids to the ground, and the other kid came running up and kicked him in the face like a football. The whole school went silent for 5 minutes, just trying to process what happened. Story 25. A student got into an inflatable Tyrannosaurus Rex costume on Halloween and ran around campus during lunch hour, pestering and laughing with the students and posing for pictures with the lunch ladies, teachers, and the principal. He did it every year from freshman to junior year, because of the pandemic, of course. Note: the student was me. I was the weird kid. Story 26. Last days of school before the exams, and a guy drove his bike in the school, pulling off some wheelies and finally doing a burnout indoors, which filled the hall with smoke and caused permanent damage to the marble floor. Shortly after that, in the middle of the exam period, a friend and I found where the main power switch for the entire school was. And of course, we had to switch it off. Alarms started going off. Everybody freaked out. The generator failed to start. And generally, it was a very bad day for the teachers trying to figure out what happened. I don't know what was more stupid, the guy with the bike or us. For anyone wondering, I attended a technical vocational school. You can see all kinds of stupid pranks pulled off there. Story 27. We had a casual friend, Marissa, who made pot-laced brownies for some high school bake sale in 2007. The principal, Mr. Camiloto to us, we were very mature, as well as a bunch of the other faculty ate some and experienced side effects. She was eventually found out and expelled from school. Another classic moment was when, in a different class, everyone was being rowdy, so the teacher yelled, Everyone quiet down. What do I look like, a zookeeper? A kid named Alex yelled back, "No, but you smell like one." Everyone laughed, and he got sent out of class. To this day, I still use that comeback.